For about 20 years, in most public school districts in America, there was a day on the calendar that ended a teacher's year, and sometimes her career, not the day she failed, the day she started to show. She could be certified, tenured, good at the job, standing in front of her class doing the work. It did not matter. The district had a rule, and the rule did not ask whether she could teach. It only asked whether she was pregnant. One board decided the sight of her was the problem, the thing you will hear at number 12. Another just marked a date months ahead and emptied her desk on it, the desk you will find at number 4. The women who finally fought these rules took them all the way to the Supreme Court. Hit the subscribe button. This is a documented record. Number 20, the question on the form. Before she ever taught a class, a woman applying to teach was often asked to account for her private life. The application form recorded whether she was single or married. If she was married, the next question, sometimes on paper, sometimes across the desk, was about children. Did she have any? Did she plan to? The answer was not idle curiosity. A woman likely to become pregnant was treated as a hiring risk, someone the district would have to replace, and that quiet calculation could cost her the job before she stood in front of a single class. The reasoning was rarely written down as a rule. It did not need to be. Everyone in the room understood that a young married woman was considered temporary, that her body was part of the interview, and that she was being measured for how long she would last before pregnancy took her out. She came in to be judged on how she taught. She was judged instead on what her future might do to the staffing chart. Nobody had to say it out loud. The form said it for them. Number 19, the single woman they preferred. The marriage bar, the old rule that a woman had to leave teaching the moment she married, was mostly dying by the 1950s, but it did not die cleanly. It left behind a preference. By 1951, only about 18% of school boards still flatly refused to hire married women, and only about 10% still refused to keep a teacher who married, both down sharply from the years around the war. The written ban was fading from the books. The habit of mind that built it was not. In the hiring room, a single woman was still quietly seen as the safer bet, the one who would not disappear into a household, the one who would not be gone in a year with a baby. A married woman could get the job. She simply carried a question the single applicant across the hall did not, a small shadow over her name that no one stated and everyone weighed. Many women learned to read that shadow. Some kept a wedding quiet, or kept working under a maiden name because they had seen what marrying out loud could cost. The rule was leaving. The suspicion stayed behind. Number 18, the resignation she chose. Many pregnant teachers were never formally fired. They were persuaded to resign. It happened in a principal's office with the door closed and the voice kind. Leaving now on your own is the graceful thing to do. Think of the children. Think of how it looks. And so the record showed a voluntary departure, a woman stepping down of her own free will, when everyone in the building knew she had been walked to that decision. In one documented case, the board minutes recorded that a teacher's resignation was accepted, in the board's own gentle phrase, with regret, even though she had been shown the door. The difference between fired and resigned mattered to the paperwork and to almost no one else. She lost the job either way, but the file said she chose it, which meant the district owed her nothing, and which meant that years later, if anyone asked, there was no firing on the record to explain. The kind voice did the cruelest part of the work. The minutes made it look like a favor she had asked for. She signed her own name at the bottom of her ending. Number 17, the rule with no appeal. The heart of these policies was a single move, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. At a certain month of pregnancy, the teacher was presumed unable to do her job. Not examined, not tested, not asked, presumed. It did not matter that she felt fine, that her own doctor had cleared her, that she had not missed a day of school all year. The rule treated every pregnant teacher at one fixed point as automatically incapable, and nothing she could say or prove was allowed to change that. There was no hearing, because in the district's eyes there was nothing to decide. The month had arrived. That was the whole case against her. Think about what that means for a grown woman who knew her own body and her own classroom. Her judgment counted for nothing. Her experience counted for nothing. A calendar knew better than she did whether she could stand in front of 30 children and teach. Years later, the Supreme Court would give this thing its proper name, a conclusive presumption, and strike it down for exactly this reason. In the 1950s, it simply ran unanswerable over woman after woman. Number 16, the doctor's note that couldn't save her. A pregnant teacher could go to her physician, explain the situation, and come back with a letter stating plainly that she was healthy and fully able to work. She could lay that letter on the administrator's desk. It made no difference to the leaving. Under these rules, a doctor's certificate governed only one thing: her return, whether she would be allowed back after the birth. It had no power at all over whether she could stay. She could be medically cleared, standing there with proof in her hand, and still be required to walk out on the district's date. Sit with how that would feel. You have done everything right. You have gone to the doctor. You have the paper. You are well. And the one document that speaks to your actual condition is simply not admitted. Not because anyone doubts it, but because the rule was never about your condition in the first place. Her health was allowed to matter later, for readmission, once the district had already decided she was gone. The note said she was able. The rule was not listening. It had never once been about whether she could do the work. Number 15, the moral fitness clause. Teaching contracts in this era commonly carried a clause about moral fitness, language that gave the board the power to dismiss a teacher for conduct it judged immoral. For a married teacher, a pregnancy was expected, if inconvenient to the schedule. For an unmarried one, a pregnancy was proof. It was visible evidence of exactly the kind of conduct the clause existed to punish, and it could end her career on the spot, with the contract's own words there to justify it. These clauses were written broadly on purpose. Broad language meant the board rarely had to specify what it meant by immoral. It only had to point. An unmarried pregnant teacher had, in the board's eyes, already convicted herself, in public, where the whole town could see. There was nothing to investigate and no defense to hear. Her body was treated as the confession, and because the shame was assumed to be hers alone, she often left quietly, told no one why, and carried it for the rest of her life. The contract had warned her, in words vague enough to mean whatever the board later needed them to mean. She had signed it because she wanted to teach. Number 14, the classroom she was hidden from. One of the reasons boards gave for removing pregnant teachers was the students. A visibly pregnant woman, the argument went, would raise questions in a classroom, would unfavorably influence the children, would stir up the kind of curiosity a school existed to keep a lid on. Historians who studied these policies found this reasoning stated seriously, in plain daylight, by the very people who wrote the rules. Her growing body was treated as a disruption all by itself, something the children should be protected from seeing, as though a pregnancy were a strange event that happened somewhere far away, and not in half the homes those same children walked back to every afternoon. She was not removed because she could not teach. She was removed because she could be seen. The thing the district was shielding the students from was the plain fact of where babies come from, a fact those children already half knew. A woman who had given years to other people's children was told her own coming child made her unfit to be looked at. Look at what these first few have in common. Not one of them turned on whether the woman could teach. They turned on whether she was married, whether she was showing, whether a child might ask a question. Her ability never entered the room. The rule had already decided what she was before it ever watched her work. What follows is the machinery that decided it. The fixed lines and the numbers the boards trusted more than the women themselves. Number 13, the continuity excuse. When the boards were asked to defend these fixed departure dates, the answer was almost always the same two words: continuity of instruction. A firm cutoff, they explained, let the district plan ahead, line up a substitute, and keep the classroom steady for the children. It sounded reasonable. It was the respectable version of the rule, the one you could say out loud at a public meeting without anyone flinching. But look at how it actually worked. The dates fell wherever a given pregnancy happened to fall, scattered across the school year, so that one teacher was pulled out in October and another in March, right in the middle of the very semesters the rule claimed to be protecting. A court would eventually notice this out loud. If continuity were truly the goal, a teacher could simply give early notice and finish her term, and the children would keep their teacher longer, not lose her mid-year to a calendar. The cutoff did not serve the students, it served the removal, dressed up neatly as a schedule so that no one had to call it what it was. Number 12, the watermelon logic. Here is the reasoning in the actual words of the people who used it. A school board member, defending the removal of pregnant teachers, said it was simply not good for the school system to have them standing in front of children, because a student might go home and say his teacher had swallowed a watermelon. That was the threat. A joke a child might tell. In the Cleveland case, the trial record went further, describing a junior high class where the children had started taking bets on whether the baby would arrive in the classroom or out in the hall. That is what the great dignity of the institution came down to when you got to the bottom of it. A watermelon, a wager among 7th graders. And on the strength of that, the Cleveland Board of Education built a written policy, one that stopped a working woman's paycheck and pulled her out of the job she was trained for. The stated reason to end a grown woman's career was that some children might giggle. Nobody in charge seems to have been embarrassed to say it. They put it in the record, and the record kept it. Number 11, the unpaid calendar. The leave was not paid. That sentence sounds small until you sit inside it. When a pregnant teacher was removed under these rules, she was placed on maternity leave without pay, and on that date the income simply stopped. It was not counted as an illness. It was not covered the way a man's surgery would have been covered. It was its own separate category, unpaid by design, and the entire loss landed on her. At the moment, her household was about to get larger and every dollar mattered more. A married teacher lost her salary for months, often when it was the salary the family had been counting on. An unmarried one usually lost the job outright and the income with it. The district kept its schedule tidy and moved the whole cost onto the woman, who had done nothing but continue an ordinary human life. Many of these women had gone into teaching precisely because it was respectable, dependable work. Then the dependable work vanished the season they needed it most. The rule took her paycheck and called the taking leave. Leave suggests something waiting for your return. She was not even promised that. Number 10, the 5-month line. In Cleveland, the number was 5. Under a rule the Cleveland Board of Education put in place in 1952, a pregnant teacher was required to begin unpaid maternity leave 5 full months before her expected due date. 5 months. Say that slowly because it matters. That is long before the late, heavy weeks of a pregnancy, long before there is any physical reason a woman cannot stand at the front of a room and teach a lesson. She had to file for the leave in advance and step out on schedule, whether she was healthy or not, whether she was willing or not. A woman could feel perfectly well, could be teaching beautifully, could want nothing more than to finish her year and be sent home for the better part of it anyway. The number was not chosen because something happened to a woman's body at 5 months. It was chosen because it was a number, round and clean and easy for an office to enforce, and the district plainly preferred a clean number on a form to the living judgment of the woman it was written about. Her own sense of what she could do never got a vote. Number 9, the 4-month line. Cleveland was not some lone exception, and that is exactly the point. Down in Chesterfield County, Virginia, the school board ran its own version of the same machine, and there the line was drawn at 4 months. A pregnant teacher had to leave work at least 4 months before her expected due date, and on top of that, she had to give the board written notice at least 6 months ahead. A different state, a different board, a different number on the page, and underneath it, the very same rule doing the very same thing to the very same kind of woman. This was not one strange district with one strange superintendent a person could dismiss as a local oddity. It was a pattern repeated across the country in small local variations, each board setting its own cutoff and each cutoff accomplishing the identical result. 4 months in Virginia, 5 in Ohio. The specific figure shifted from place to place, which only proves the figure was never the real reason. What never shifted was the presumption under all of it, that a pregnant teacher was the district's to schedule out, on a date it chose for her. Notice what the two numbers have in common: 4 months in one place, 5 in another, chosen by different boards who never spoke to each other, and yet the same rule underneath. This was not a local quirk. A national survey of school districts had already measured it years earlier and found that most districts with any maternity policy at all made the leave compulsory on a fixed line, whether the woman was able or not. 2 districts, 1 system. What follows is what that system took from her once it decided she was leaving. Number 8, the notice she had to give. The pregnancy itself became a reportable event, something a woman was required to hand over to her employer. Under these rules, a teacher had to formally notify the board in writing that she was expecting, and do it months in advance, in some places as much as 6 months before the birth. Her body's most private news, the kind of thing a woman might want to hold close, or tell her own mother first, or keep to herself until she was ready, became an official disclosure filed on the district's timetable instead of her own. She did not get to decide when to speak, or whether to speak yet, or who should know first. The rule decided for her, early, so the machinery of her removal could start turning on schedule. A woman might barely have shared the news with her husband before she was required to put it in a letter to a room full of administrators. And that letter was not a courtesy she chose to offer. It was a duty she owed, and her job was pinned to it. The first official act of her pregnancy was a memo addressed to the men who would end her year. Number 7, the job that wasn't held. When she left, her position did not wait for her. Under the Cleveland rule, she was promised no reinstatement at all, only what the policy politely called priority in reassignment, which meant a chance at some available job she was qualified for whenever she was finally allowed to come back. Not her classroom, not her school, not the students whose names she had learned and whose years she had been building. Just priority, a spot near the front of a line for whatever door happened to be open. All the work she had put in simply dissolved into a vacancy list. Think of the ordinary man down the hall who took medical leave and fully expected his desk, his room, and his students to be right there waiting when he returned, because of course they would be. She got a ticket and was told to wait for an opening, The district kept the right to place her anywhere it liked, or nowhere at all, and it called that arrangement generous. She had given the school years of steady work. In return, the moment she was pregnant, her own job was already being handed to someone else. Number 6, the seniority that reset. Because her departure was treated as a resignation or as an unprotected leave rather than a normal continuation of service, the years she had already given could quietly stop counting. Seniority was not a small thing. It was the standing that decided her place on the pay scale, and just as importantly, protected her from being first out the door when layoffs came. That standing did not always survive the gap. She could come back, if she came back at all, nearer the bottom than the place she had earned through years of good work, her time erased or discounted, simply because she had done the one ordinary thing the rule punished. A woman with real experience could return to find herself treated as a beginner again. So the pregnancy did not only cost her the months she was away, it reached backward and took part of what she had built before she was ever expecting. She paid twice, once in the salary that stopped and once in the standing that reset, both taken for the same single fact of a human life. And a younger woman watching this happen learned exactly what her own years would be worth. Number 5, the one-year cliff. The newest teachers were handed the hardest version of all. Cleveland's rule was amended so that a teacher with less than 1 year of continuous service did not even qualify for maternity leave. She did not get to step out and hold a place to return to. She had to resign outright at the beginning of her 5th month of pregnancy. No leave, no priority in reassignment, no line to wait in, just out and done. Think about who that fell on hardest. The women early in their careers, the ones with the least money saved, the ones who most needed the job to hold, the ones with the very most to lose, were the ones handed the cleanest and most total cut. The district saved its worst terms for the teachers least able to survive them. The rule did not soften for inexperience or youth or need. It sharpened. If you had not yet finished a single year, your pregnancy did not pause your career while you had your baby. It simply ended it, and you started over from nothing, if you ever found your way back into a classroom at all. Follow what has happened to her by this point. The leave that paid her nothing, the job that was not held, the years that stopped counting, the clean resignation forced on the newest women of all. None of this was punishment for teaching badly. She taught exactly as well pregnant as she had the week before. What follows is the moment the whole system was built around the date on the calendar and the presumption that made it legal. Number 4, the empty desk in March. Picture the day itself, because thousands of women lived it. A teacher is in the middle of her year, a unit half taught, a class that knows her voice and her habits and trusts her. She feels fine. Her doctor says she is fine. And on a date the district set months earlier, a date that has nothing to do with her health or her work, she packs up her desk and walks out, and a substitute steps into her room. In the Cleveland case, Jo Carol LaFleur was teaching a class of 7th grade girls the school had labeled under achievers, the very students who most needed a steady, familiar adult in front of them, when the rule pulled her out. The children lost their teacher in the middle of the year. The teacher lost her class in the middle of the year. And the reason was nothing that happened in that room, no failure, no complaint, no missed day. It was a number on a form, chosen by people who never met her students. The desk sat empty that spring because a calendar said it had to, and 30 children looked up at a stranger. Number 3, the rule older than it looked. It would be easy to assume these were ancient rules, dusty holdovers from another century, that were quietly dying out by the 1950s. enforced by no one, and just waiting to fall off the books. They were not. The Cleveland Board of Education adopted its 5-month rule in 1952 at the direct request of its own superintendent, and it ran on, essentially unchanged, for the next 2 decades. That is the part worth sitting with. This was not a relic somebody forgot to repeal. It was a modern policy, written by modern administrators in the post-war years, voted in at a public meeting, and then renewed by simple inaction every single year that followed, as the men in charge looked at it and chose to leave it exactly where it was. The rule was younger than it looked, and far more deliberate than anyone who kept it in place liked to admit. It was not the past refusing to die. It was the present choosing this on purpose over and over. Somebody sat down in 1952 and wrote it, and year after year, somebody who could have struck it out instead let it stand. Number 2, the presumption itself. Here is the thing that made all of it illegal today, said as plainly as it can be said. These rules treated every pregnant teacher as conclusively incapable of doing her job at a fixed date with no chance whatsoever to prove otherwise. In 1974, in a case called Cleveland Board of Education against LaFleur, the Supreme Court held exactly that to be unconstitutional. A blanket rule that simply presumed every pregnant woman unfit, the court said, violated due process, because whether any particular woman could keep teaching was an individual matter about a real person, and could not be decided in advance, in the dark, by a number. That was the whole flaw, finally named out loud after all those years. Not that leave existed, not that pregnancy was real. The flaw was that the rule refused to look at the actual woman standing in front of it. For 2 decades, it had not looked. It had only counted months on a form. The thing that finally ended these policies was not the mercy of any school board. It was a court insisting at last that a pregnant teacher was a person and not a presumption. Number 1, the teacher who was showing. Picture just one of them because there were thousands. She earned her certificate, stood up in her own classroom, learned every child's name, and taught them well, year after year. She was healthy. By every measure that touched the work, she was a good teacher living an ordinary life. And then she began to show. A date she never chose came due. She gathered her things while her class watched and walked out into unpaid months with no promise of return. Her whole offense was that she was visible, and what was visible was the most human thing a person can do. The district called it leave. It called it standards. It called it protecting the children. She knew what it really was. It was the day being pregnant cost her the work she loved, and no one who did it to her had to look her in the eye. Maybe you are remembering a face right now. Your mother, your grandmother, or the young woman you once were. Did she ever lose a job the day it started to show? Tell me her name and what she was teaching when they made her stop.